Help MythVision keep bringing you material by becoming a Patreon member, as well as PayPal. Like, share, subscribe, and comment.
Jason, we talked about Esau earlier, Jacob wrestling and such. And you said, there's some more about Esau that's kind of not talked about, obviously, in the canon. And most people would never even know this type of information. Esau's a hairy fighting warrior. He's kind of like the gym rat who doesn't shave.
Right. Yeah, he's completely hairy. He's like your classic wild man, which pops up repeatedly in ancient mythology, and it was sort of a way that people who considered themselves civilized, who lived in cities, would view people who lived, a nomadic lifestyle, these hunter-gatherers and stuff, because some of these stories began at the dawn of civilization. People first discovered. Or first invented agriculture, and they began doing this, and you have sort of this conflict between your farmers and your people who live a more nomadic lifestyle, and also your people who are like shepherds, because you're all trying to use the same land. You have people trying to hunt on your land, and of course they would try to hunt your goats, because goats are easy targets, especially when they're in a pen. And then you have people who are trying to raise crops, but then this shepherd, his goats are coming in and eating all my cabbage. And so your city dwellers and your shepherds and your nomads, they're all, they're all getting into it, and they all kind of demonize each other in their myths. And you actually see this throughout the Old Testament. Every time there's a scene where there's a farmer and a shepherd, the shepherd is the good guy and the farmer is evil. Just think about Cain and Abel. Cain's over here and he's growing all these crops. Abel has all these sheep. Abel's the good guy. Cain goes and whacks him with a rock. It's always like that throughout the Old Testament. Now, when you see some of these nomadic people, sometimes in various cultures, they depict them as being basically like half animal. They're like, oh yeah, he doesn't just like roam around and not live in a city. This dude, he's actually covered in hair like an animal. And Esau was like that. The way that Jacob tricked their father was to actually cover himself in animal skins, and so he's like literally wearing pelts on his arm, and his blind father touches him. He's like, okay, yeah, well, you don't sound like Esau, but
you don't
Jacob isn't woolly like this,
He doesn't smell like him either.
Right. He's like, oh yeah, you don't smell like a dirty goat. So, yeah, so that Esau, he's supposed to be this wild man. He's completely covered in fur. Okay, he's not really human. He's Sasquatch. But he's kind of a badass. Okay. He's like in tune with nature, very similar to Enkidu. He's in tune with nature. He can kind of commune with the animals. He's like more in tune with them. He can go and spend weeks just out in the wilderness with nothing but like a stone knife, and he'll be fine, okay? But now we have this weird scene where Jacob is sitting there, and he's cooking this lentil stew. And Esau comes up, and he's exhausted. He's on the brink of death. And he's like, look, I need some food. It's like the old Gauntlet video game. Hairy warrior needs food badly. And that's what he's like, I'm about to die. And he's like, give me some food. And Jacob's like, no, man, I cooked this. And he's like, look, if I don't have food, I'm going to die. And Jacob's like, okay, I'll give you a bowl of soup if you give me your inheritance. And he's like, well, what good would my inheritance be if I don't survive? And so he trades away his right to rule Israel in exchange for a bowl of soup. And lentil soup. I mean, come on. That's like the worst soup. It's literally the worst soup. Okay? So he trades away his right to rule an entire kingdom for a bowl of soup. Now, why is he so desperate in that scene? He's like a wild man. He lives in the wilderness. All of a sudden, he goes for a walk and he comes back, and if he doesn't get a bowl of soup, he's going to die. It doesn't make any sense. Well, there's this book called the Book of Jasher, and that's Jasher. Now, it has sort of a questionable history. No one's quite sure exactly how old the Book of Jasher is. It's referenced in the Old Testament, but scholars argue that the Book of Jasher, as we have it today, is a much newer book. However, many scholars also argue that many of the stories contained in the Book of Jasher do come from an older time period. They are gathering up some of these older stories, and they collected them into the Book of Jasher, just at a later date. So the book itself is newer, but the stories do come from an older time period. And in the Book of Jasher, we find this curious tale where just before that whole scene with Jacob and Esau transpires, Esau, he's going out and he's hunting. And as he's hunting, he comes across this hunting party with the Babylonian king Nimrod and some of his warriors. Now, you may be familiar with the name. It's been used as an insult to mean an idiot for decades. But Nimrod is a specific character from Babylonian mythology, and he appears in the Bible. And what this guy is, he's a semi-divine figure, it seems. He's sort of mentioned alongside like the heroes of old, the men of renown, these sort of like demigod figures like Hercules. And he is this sort of this Babylonian king and this hunter figure. And we actually have myths that when Abraham was born, there was this sort of a nativity scene similar to what we see with Jesus or Zarathustra, where there's like this bright light in the sky, and these oracles, they tell Nimrod, they're like, look, there's this new guy who's going to come along and rule this great nation. And then Nimrod gets all paranoid. He's like, I better get rid of him. So he sends out his people. Y'all start getting all these babies. Y'all start chopping them up, or throwing them in the water or whatever. Go kill all the infants, okay? We see this story recycled again for Moses. And this goes all the way back to King Sargon, okay? This is a story that comes from him. But Nimrod, King Nimrod, he goes and he does this, and an angel, I think Michael, takes Abraham and brings him into a cave. And so he goes into this cave as an infant, and then he comes out I think 6 days later, and he's an adult. Okay, so he just, some kind of divine power. He ages. Now all of a sudden he's an adult, and he has survived the slaughter of the infants due to this, divine intervention. And he eventually, grows to grows to become like the father of the nation, basically just by having kids who will eventually inherit Israel. And so Nimrod's, his fears are sort of unfounded concerning this particular person. But later on, he encounters Esau. And so Nimrod and his buddies, they're out hunting. They're hunting all kind of dangerous animals. And they come across Esau. Esau is another great hunter. And they get into this fight. And so we have Nimrod, who is at this point 500 or 600 years old. He's this like demigod figure. He's like at least 50% divine. And he's out here. He's killing these animals and stuff because that's what he does. He's a great hunter. He encounters Esau, and he and his hunting buddies, they get in a fight with Esau. Almost like to say, who's the better hunter? The great Babylonian hunter or the great Edomite hunter? And Esau just kills them all. It's this horrible battle. It's this long, drawn out thing. And Esau manages to kill Nimrod, he's basically like a Hercules, But Esau manages to kill Nimrod along with his buddies. And after he does this, he's wounded and he's exhausted from this long fight that, may have been drawn out. It may have taken hours or days even. And so he's exhausted. And this is when he stumbles into camp in desperate need of food and is willing to trade away his entire inheritance just for a bowl of lentil stew.
So we're kind of stuck without the context and the biblical narrative. That's interesting, though, because Jasher would, from a Hebrew standpoint or Israel standpoint, of course they would have their warrior win,
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and so it may be, here's this weird little story in Genesis, let's expand upon that. Or they may be preserving an older tradition and Genesis just didn't include all of it. There are other examples of this, like in Genesis 6, where it talks about, at this time, these angels came down and they lay with human women, and that created this race of giants, the Nephilim.
That's why,
and then it just moves on.
That's why this whole human nature argument, it makes no sense why giants appear. You see what I'm saying?
Right. It's like, if some people in Israel have sex with women, then we have these giants that are said to be like 5,000 feet tall.
In Enoch, yeah.
What?
But even if you didn't go that extreme,
right? You still end up with giants, and the earth has to be purged. It all has to be deleted with a flood. What? Because Israelites had sex? I thought he told them to be fruitful and multiply.
Right. It's
that doesn't make sense.
And he doesn't say be fruitful, multiply only with the righteous or only with a certain, it doesn't give you any context.
Right. It just multiply. Be like bunnies and fill the world.
Right. You're human. They're human. You guys are all mortal now.
Right.
Go ahead and be with each other. No, it doesn't give you this, don't be with this person, be with this person.
Well, I think the big clue in Genesis 6 is when it says, these sons of God had sex with humans. I think that may be a clue.
Yeah, I think so, but there's people who want to read into that because you can find passages that, in Exodus, I think 8, there's a place where Moses is referenced as an Elohim. There's places where they want to go see there's a guy and he's referenced as this, or sons of God and it references Israel, or people, and so they want to take that interpretive method. But see, run into problems.
Well, there's a problem with the whole thing about Moses. And saying, oh, well, look, we're calling him maybe like one of these Elohim, but he's just a man. We have to remember that when Moses went and talked to Yahweh, his entire visage was completely transformed, and he had to then cover his face so it didn't harm people.
So he's semi-divine, which is
Moses
why
is not just a man. It's basically telling us that Moses, he has been transformed. And we actually see in Enoch that Moses becomes an angel.
Elijah, Enoch, and Moses. There's a tradition that none of those three guys actually died. I know.
They all just were taken up.
Right.
And at the end of Deuteronomy, Moses, he just kind of, the same way he does on Sinai, he goes up to the top of the mountain to commune with Yahweh, and then he's never seen again.
And they think he died, and then they're looking for him, but there's no reference. He died. We know he died. So
yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, and we have this weird little thing. So it may just be trying to explain this weird thing, or it may be that Genesis was aware of this larger story and just left it out. And now there's an interesting little tidbit about Nimrod. So everyone's familiar with the word. It's like, he did something stupid. Look at that Nimrod. There's a reason why people use Nimrod to mean idiot. Nowhere in the myth is Nimrod an idiot. He's like this great, intelligent king who's a good hunter. But what happened was back in, I believe it was in the 60s, in one of the Warner Brothers cartoons, Elmer Fudd is hunting Bugs Bunny. And, of course, he's a bumbling idiot. And when he's trying to kill Bugs Bunny calls him a regular Nimrod. He's not saying he's stupid. he is sarcastically calling him a good hunter. Like if someone did something stupid and you're like, oh yeah, he's a regular Einstein, you know, that's what he's saying. He's like, oh yeah, look, he's a brilliant hunter. He can't even kill a rabbit with a shotgun. But no one got the reference. And so they thought that when Bugs Bunny was sarcastically calling him a great hunter, that they thought that he meant an idiot. And so when he said Nimrod, they misunderstood the meaning, and so everyone started using the word Nimrod to mean moron instead of great hunter. And it's stuck around ever since.